morning, good afternoon, buongiorno, ciao, arrivederci, wherever you are in the world. Yeah, a lot of it's Italian, but hey, that's the only other language I really know. A little bit of Braille. Today on the Digital Access Show, for those that don't know me, I'm Narelle, but today on the Digital Access Show, we are really still exploring the theme of usable digital communication. Last week, we really looked at clarity and conciseness. This week, I'm going back to the usable digital communication in its entirety for a really special reason. I am sick of auditing websites that just don't meet the grade. You know, and yeah, I'm on my frustration day because I'm halfway through a website that's really good and I know the next one is going to just drive me crazy. So to do this, I've actually brought on a very special lady, a very special guest, Emma Bennison. Emma has been the CEO of Blind Citizens Australia, and she stopped that about, I think, 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. And Emma's got so much experience. She's studied, she's done some great stuff. I'd like you all to meet a very lovely lady, Emma Bennison. Emma, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me, Narelle.
Emma, I've given a little bit of a brief intro. Tell me a bit more about yourself. I'm having a word bad day, a
That's
bad
okay.
salad word day. Oh,
Um, sure. So, yes, absolutely was the CEO of Blind Citizens Australia. It was an amazing privilege to hold that role for about 5 years. I also am currently the Chief Innovation Officer at an organisation called Life Without Barriers, which is one of Australia's largest providers of community services. So it goes well beyond disability to child, youth and family services, homeless services, immigration services, etc. And it's a very large organisation. And my role is really about embedding lived experience perspectives of the people we employ and the people we support across the organisation. And of course, that very much links in with how we make sure that our systems and processes and communications are accessible. And look, before that, I spent a long time working in the arts and cultural sector, and particularly in the arts and disability sector. And a lot of that work centred around accessible communication in the arts. I'm a particular advocate and very passionate advocate for audio description, for example. And I was the CEO of Arts Access Australia and also Access Arts in Queensland before that. So I'm also a parent and have two well, almost adult children. So, and a musician in my spare time.
in your spare
Not
time.
that I have much of that.
No, no. And what what was the one attribute that you brought to every one of these jobs that gave you the edge over everyone else?
That's such a good question. Honestly, I think it's probably um, my ability um, to be equal parts firm and diplomatic in the way that I lead. So and advocate. So I'm very much someone who wants to see, change, but I'm also someone who wants to understand why the change hasn't happened from the point of view of the people that might be blocking that change. Because I think if you don't understand the people that you're kind of up against, so to speak, then it's very difficult to get that change to happen. So I think, being able to put myself in other people's shoes and try to kind of give them something that's going to be useful to them, but that's also going to get the change that I'm seeking, has probably stood me in pretty good stead over the years.
Excellent. Actually, yeah, that's given me a couple of thoughts, so thank you. Emma, what to you is usable digital communication?
I think usable is such a great description, I'm so glad we're talking about it through that lens, because you can have communication that is accessible, like it might meet the accessibility standards, but that doesn't make it usable. And it's really hard to pinpoint what that difference is. But I think for me, it's about something that actually content that is actually pleasant to interact with, um, content that doesn't make me feel like I am being othered. In fact, I was just having a conversation before I came onto to this program about the fact that while it might be really nice to have a toggle, for example, that says at the top of a website that says, click here if you'd like the accessible version, or click here if you'd like the plain language version. That's not really accessibility, because that immediately makes me feel unwelcome, because I've been put into a box and I'm told I have to go over there because I'm different. So for me, it's about seeing that people have thought about the way that they're communicating digitally, and that I've been a part of that thinking. And there are some really subtle but important ways that people can do that, through things like image descriptions, or, making sure that their buttons are labeled, or, anything that you can think of that. But those sort of subtle but important things are the things that make me feel welcome, and make me feel included. Whereas, telling me to go somewhere else, it just makes me feel like I've been put in a box, and it might look like accessibility, but it's not.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. I think one of my big bugbears at the moment is when you get in a menu and you're tabbing through and you cannot get out of that menu by hitting the
Yeah,
escape key.
yeah,
And you've
yeah,
just got to keep going.
yeah,
And then if you've got to do that 5 or 10
yeah,
times,
yeah.
it is
Slows you down.
just, it
Slows you down.
slows you down and
And
it frustrates you.
it does. And I think the other thing is, now I'm getting on my hobby horse, but that is that there is an inherent assumption that people with disability, you know, aren't employed, don't work, don't have anything better to do. Therefore, we've all got time to navigate these inaccessible processes. And the other one that I get really frustrated about, and it's been happening for as long as I can remember, is the front end of a website, for example, might be accessible. A good example of this is when I was a CEO, I often had to sign funding agreements, and I often with government departments whose responsibility was to people with disability, that people with disability were the reason they existed. And it would so often be the case that they would say to me, "Oh yes, here's the funding agreement," and it would be an inaccessible PDF. And I would say, "Can you give me that in an accessible format?" And they'd say, "Oh, all our brochures and all of our front end communications that are client facing are accessible, but we didn't really think about making our forms accessible." And I said, "Yeah, and the inherent assumption in that is that a person with disability would never be running an organization." And that's why,
Yes.
that's a real problem, because it just makes me sit there and go, okay, you've really never even thought that I would have that capacity, or that anybody else would have that capacity. And so it's not just about the fact that the form's inaccessible, it's about the fact that you've just told me that your expectation, and therefore the expectations of society, are really low. And that's a problem when you're running a department that is trying to enhance the rights of people with disability. So it matters. It doesn't just matter from a usability perspective. It matters because of what messages you might be sending.
Yeah, you are so right. I think I have the same issues, even down to my brother. It's a financial planner, and
Mm.
I had to change. You know how you've got your beneficiaries
Yes.
that you've
Yep.
got to nominate?
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Oh, you've got to update this." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said,
Mm.
"I said, well, just send me." And I'm thinking, okay, I'll just test it. And I got it,
Mm.
and I thought, oh, this form is not accessible. So I said to
Mm.
him, "Oh, not accessible." And
Mm.
I'm thinking, you're
Mm.
my brother. You
I
should
know. it's
a bit more
disturbing, isn't it?
awareness.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And, and I'll give him credit. He goes, oh, okay. He said, well, get one of your boys. And I said, okay. And I still got the giggles because my son tried, and Stu said, oh, he said, it didn't get filled out correctly. Just give me the information. I'll fill it out. And he said, he said without thinking, oh, what's your birthday? And he said, oh, yeah, don't worry about that. But the point is, people really don't know what they don't know.
No.
And this is frustrating. Instead of just asking us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the inherent assumption is that, I mean, your example there, the inherent assumption is, oh, well, it's, it's probably accessible. People don't even think about it. So they just assume that it's going to be okay because, you can use a computer. But not all forms are created equal, right? So
that's it.
It's just something that people haven't thought about. And so I think the other piece that's important to be cognizant of is that it's exhausting constantly having to advocate for accessibility. And I don't think that we as people with disability are always very conscious of how much additional energy that we expend on actually just getting from one day to the next in terms of accessibility, and how much advocacy we actually have to do to make that possible.
Yeah, I think the biggest shock to the system for me, because I actually lost my sight. I was about 42 when I started losing my sight. And about 4 years ago, I actually lost all functional sight. And it was overnight.
Yes.
And I was lucky. I'd gone on a road. I was prepared for it. I've done a lot of work to prepare for it. And that's where I was lucky. I was prepared for it. But I had put the time in, learning the cane skills, learning the dog skills, learning screen reader skills, learning everything that I'd need, that life would just go on.
Yeah.
However, I was in a camper van with a friend because we'd gone out to wineries.
Yeah.
And that was exhausting. The rest of the day and the next, and I'd hit about 7. I was just exhausted because of that extra concentration.
Extra mental load. Yeah.
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 Just to do what anyone else could do.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't go away. It's never going to go away. And it must be the same for a person with hearing or cognitive impairment or ASD. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. No.
It's that extra load, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
What do you think is the state of usable digital communication in Australia today? Is it good?
Well, I'm an optimist. And so I would say that if you had to be blind or if you had to be disabled, in some ways, you would have to say that this is the best time for that, because we have so much accessible. We have so much adaptive technology that we didn't have 20 years ago, right? So things are better, I think, than they used to be. What worries me, though, is that because of that, perhaps to some extent, I think organisations are sometimes being let off the hook. And what I mean by that is that sometimes there's just a sense that, oh, yeah, well, people with disability have all this technology and they've got the NDIS, and so we don't have to worry, everything's all right. Now, I think that actually it is becoming less and less acceptable, especially, with the findings of the Disability Royal Commission and various other things. It is becoming less and less acceptable for communications to be, digital communications to not be accessible. And so I think what's actually going to start to happen is that we're going to see a lot more pushback from people with disability when we don't have our access requirements met. But I do think that whilst the adaptive technology is improving, there is not enough attention being paid to the accessibility of websites, the accessibility of apps. There's a very near enough is good enough approach, I think, being taken to accessibility. And I think the onus is being, it continues to be on people with disability to demonstrate why something is inaccessible, whereas in fact the onus needs to be on business to demonstrate that something is. And I think if we could make that shift, and part of it is about repurposing our human rights legislation. It's not just about accessible communications, it's a broader issue. But I think it's really easy to see examples in the accessible communication space where this could really be flipped. And if we could flip the script on it, we would be a hell of a lot better off, I think, and a lot less exhausted, let's be frank.
And I think it also means that a lot more people with disability would be working.
Absolutely
and wouldn't
right.
be so reliant
Absolutely
on the government.
Right. Yep.
And
that's
that.
the business case. That's the business case for doing it, isn't it? You know,
Mm.
if we weren't spending so much time, you know, trying to make things accessible, or you know, not being able to work in the industries that perhaps we worked in previously for people who might have acquired their disability, you know, having to move out of those industries, then we would be benefiting the economy. So
massively.
It makes sense. But I think the other point that people forget, and it's a really basic one, but is that any time that you make something accessible for a person with disability, you're actually making the process better for everyone. And that's why I get on my hobby horse about let's not make a separate accessible, you know, site for somebody, because actually, you know, you can make things accessible without losing the visual elements of it. You know, you can have both coexisting. For example, like if we're talking from a blindness perspective, you can definitely have things coexisting. But you know, if I think about, I don't know, text messaging is always a classic example. You know, text messaging came about because it was an adaptation for people who are deaf. And now we all benefit from it. I don't think anyone would like to live in a world where we couldn't text. So, you know, that's a classic example. I mean, the other one is audiobooks. Everybody loves audiobooks, but they came about because of people who are blind. So I just think we need to start thinking about accessibility as an asset rather than a deficit. And we need to think about what can be gained from it rather than seeing it as something that's going to be, you know, expensive and time consuming and all of those things. It doesn't have to be, especially if we build it in from the ground up. So I think we just need to start thinking about it differently and talking about it differently.
Yeah, and that's it. And the other thing I think is we could use the big stick.
Yeah.
But the big stick always generates aggression, upset, frustration, all those negative emotions. And yeah, obviously the big stick is we can sit there and say, hey, you're breaching the Disability Discrimination Act. But, you know, I don't think that's the answer. I really still think the answer is people being proactive and asking for it. Someone said to me the other day, in the 30 years they've been in business, they've never been asked for an accessible document.
Wow,
and my
that's
comment
incredible.
back was, yeah, it is. My answer back was, yeah, but, you know, in that 30 years, people with disability were told they shouldn't expect these things.
That's exactly right. The expectations are too low. And that's the problem we have. Yep. Yeah. I was talking to a group of people the other day about accessibility. And I said, you know, it's everybody's responsibility. And what I meant by that was it is the responsibility of allies to think about it and to actually look at life through an accessibility lens. But it is equally the responsibility of people with disability not to go, oh yeah, we're fine, everything's fine, we'll manage. We need to start actually speaking up and saying, no, actually that's not okay. What we really need is this, because unless we ask, people don't know. So it is on us as well, I think.
I actually agree with you fully. It is on us as well. And it's on our families as well, because if we're independent, then our families are not needed. And I hate the word needed. But, you know, there's some things I'll never be able to do again. I can't drive a car, but I can hop on a bus.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I tell you a quick story about that,
Yeah.
actually?
Yeah.
We were on a cruise, and my husband is also blind, and our two kids can see. And one of the cruise staff put a piece of paper, stuck a piece of paper on our door, asking if we could call the reception so that they could read the daily schedule to us. And of course, one of my children just said, "Oh my God, this is hilarious. I'm going to call them and advocate for this." And it was so funny because she called up and she said, "Now look, do you realize what you've done? You've put a piece of paper on our door with print on it that my parents can't read. And now, I'm having to spend time calling you to try and, get you to understand the problem with that." And they said, "Why couldn't you have just called my parents and then I wouldn't have had to get involved?"
I love it.
So funny. And she did
It
such a
is.
good job. I think she was only about sort of 12 or 13 at the
Oh
time.
gosh.
And I thought, my God, this child, I've created, I've created an
You-
advocate without even without even realizing it.
But that's exactly what it is. I know when my kids were, like younger and when I first started losing my sight, we'd go somewhere and it wasn't just my boys, it
Mm,
was their mates.
they're
And
friends, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it'd be so funny. We'd be, I'd say, "Oh, come on, I'll take all whatever kids are there, we'll just go to somewhere,
Mm,
whatever."
yeah. Yeah.
And we'd be walking along. Next minute, I know I never knew which kid, the elbow
Mm.
would be shoved in front of me
Yep.
at my
Yep.
at
Yeah.
my eye height. There you go.
It's true.
Okay. And you
Yep.
just keep walking and
I know.
you think, "Oh, okay, is that Daniel or is it
Yeah.
Brady or is
Yeah.
it, oh, is it Lou? Who is it?" And you just have the elbow because they think it's normal.
Well, they do, and it's wonderful. That is like, of all the, I mean, sometimes in this work, and I'm sure you're the same, I can sometimes feel a little bit despondent about, where we're
Mm,
going. But then I look at those kids and I just think, holy, they are really going to change
mm.
the world because they really do think it's normal.
Yeah.
Now not all kids get that exposure,
Mm.
but there are more of us who are parenting and there are more of us who are getting out into the community and having those experiences. And I think really that's where it's at, the more
Yeah.
we can give those kids those experiences at a young age, the better things are going to get. So,
That's
that
it.
gives me
That's
hope.
it. And with all of this, what's a takeaway you can provide for everyone that's listening? What's a bit of advice or, yeah, just something that for
There's
them
so
to take
much, so
away?
much
I
advice. But
know.
honestly, my biggest piece of advice is just talk to us.
Mm,
Like, if you're not sure, don't make assumptions. Actually, just ask lots of curious questions. Like, if there was one sort of um, attribute I would like people to come to the table with when we're having these conversations, it is curiosity. And I don't mean the kind of curiosity where you're just being voyeuristic and asking
mm,
inappropriate questions. I mean curiosity that enables you to put your defenses to one side and um, you know, rather than coming to the table trying to justify yourself and trying to make yourself feel better, just come to the table with a curiosity that allows you to ask us questions rather than making assumptions,
mm.
and that really enables us to have a genuine interaction that makes everybody better, and makes everybody's lives easier. I think if we can do that, then we really will build a more equitable and inclusive society.
And better usable digital communication because we
Absolutely.
can tell you what we need.
Yes. Yes.
Mm,
Yeah. And don't be afraid. That's the other thing. I know that people
mm,
have a lot of fear. I've actually done a TED talk on this topic.
mm,
But I think it's really important to just let go of that fear because, we're just human, like you. And and most of us are really understanding when you screw up, right? We're not
mm,
horrible. Most of us are not
mm,
horrible, mean, nasty
mm.
people who are trying to catch you in a trap. We really want to help people make the situation better. and make communication more accessible. So try not to be afraid to come and have those conversations with us, because I think that's really important.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for being on the show. How can people contact you to keep discussing digital accessibility?
Absolutely keen to keep the discussion going, and thank you for the opportunity, Narelle. I really appreciate it. People can contact me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, Facebook, and also happy for people to send me an email on LinkedIn or whatever you want to do, and more than happy to be in contact.
Thanks, Emma. So that's another episode of the Digital Access Show. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, review. If there's people out there that you think, oh, Narelle needs to have a chat with them, please let us know. We're always looking for people that are as passionate about digital accessibility and opening up communication to everyone as us, because, it's going to make a better society for everyone. So we will see you next time. Have a good week.